Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and we're really pleased to have Richard Maybury with us. At least I hope he's going to be with us. He was with me a couple of minutes ago during the commercial break, and then we lost contact with Richard. But I trust that my engineer will be able to get Richard back on the line momentarily. I would like to say that Richard has an excellent newsletter, Richard Maybury's U.S. and World Early Warning Report. And do we have Richard?
Yeah, I'm here. Are you there?
Oh, good, you're there. We lost you for a minute, Richard. You're okay, though, right?
Yeah, there was something wrong with the phone company. They were doing something strange. I don't know what.
Well, here's what's strange about it. Was just joking about you. Say, hi, Richard, you're on the other side of the San Andreas Fault. And then,
yeah, right.
And then you were gone. So I don't know, I guess it was something with the phone company. All right. In any event, I'm glad you're with us, and I should tell our folks, most people, I think, by now are aware of you. You've been a guest on this show for a number of times, and I really want to, I'm really pleased that you could join me again. One would like to focus today on the end of Washington as Superpower, your special report that's available at your website. People can go there and order this report, right, Richard?
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
and we're looking at the website now, as which I should know by heart. It's Richard Maybury. It's richardjmaybury.com, right?
Yes, I think richardmaybury.com works too, though.
Okay, Richard Maybury, Maybury.com. And it's an excellent report. Richard, his background in history is so valuable, I think, and I think Americans don't really know much about history, or whatever they know has been homogenized and sort of propagandized by the statist institutions that we're all subjected to. Most importantly, the school system that we are all indoctrinated under. So it is a very valuable piece of work, as Richard's newsletter is. I just thought, Richard, I'd like to read off some of the topics from your latest newsletter, which I just received on the Internet. Here are some of the topics, folks, and this will give you an idea of why you need to subscribe to Richard's letter, I think. I mean, it's one of my favorite things that I read every month. Here's one topic. The new religious wars are popping up like dandelions, promising us more profits. Washington is gearing up for war with China. That's on page 4. A company likely to do well from the West's drought. You get this drought out there in California. Is a draft coming for Americans? And a new type of city where the top priority is security. And a last topic, understanding the Mideast maelstrom. Just loaded with very valuable, very fascinating information, Richard. So I just wanted our listeners to know what some of the topics were in your newsletter, which, of course, people can also order there at richardmaybury.com. Well, Richard, I opened this book, The End of Washington as Superpower, and in the early pages, you really show 3 maps depicting the Western, or the Washington Empire, I should say. It wasn't so much of an empire in 1800. You show a map in 1800, 13 colonies, and the yet-to-be-conquered Native American territory just to the west of those 13 colonies, but on this side of the Mississippi, I believe. Mm-hmm. And then in 1900, when the U.S. Had solidified that area through the lower 48 states, and I guess had also laid claims to Alaska and Hawaii and a couple of islands in the Caribbean, we became somewhat more significant. A lot more significant, in fact. But now, in 2015, a third map that you show in this wonderful book, you show the U.S. and its empire, throughout basically most of the world. It's really a very impressive area of control that the United States has, and you sort of show those countries that are where we have a military presence, and those that are really sort of subjected to American power. The direction of an expanding influence of the U.S. has looked to be, just a one-way street, Richard, up until now. It's hard for most of us to see how that can come to an end. So what is there to stop this expansion of our military-industrial complex?
Well, it is stopping simply from the forces that stop pretty much all empires, and that is it's going broke. You can only control a given amount of territory or of the world if you've got the economic resources to do it. And Washington doesn't anymore, especially the military resources. Americans don't realize that the U.S. Armed Forces, at the time, most of that imperial expansion was going on in the 1940s and 50s. The U.S. Armed Forces were the armed forces that won World War II. Mm-hmm. And an example, a statistic that's always easy to remember, is that at that time the U.S., at the end of World War II, when it started on this expansion, Washington owned 105 aircraft carriers, and it had just recently used nuclear weapons on somebody. Mm-hmm. So it had an amount of power that it had a superiority nobody has ever experienced before. And so the whole world realized that you better go along with the plans of the people in Washington, because if you don't, something very bad can happen to you. Mm-hmm. And so there was this tremendous expansion of Washington's power around the world at that time, and that's when you had things like the Bretton Woods monetary system set up, and NATO and the UN and all sorts of other economic and military arrangements that the U.S. Formed or at least promulgated in one way or another. And the whole world basically was taken over by this power by, let's say, 1955 or so. And then we get to the Vietnam War, and then they start dismantling all of this military power. And now they've got an empire they built up with this tremendous ability to impose their will on anybody, and they have dismantled that ability. So the rest of the world now is beginning to rise up and split away from the U.S. empire to start ignoring Washington's wishes. And that's the essential thing, the big picture that's going on in the world today, is the U.S. empire is falling apart because they threw away their ability to hold it together. And this is not an argument for them to launch a big military buildup and go out and try to reestablish the empire. Mm-hmm. I'm just pointing out that's the condition we're living under. When you look at the economic problems we're having and the foreign policy problems and all sorts of other difficulties that Americans are being told are big things that they have to solve, when you look at this big world picture, that's the essential thing that's going on, is the empire that was built in the 40s and 50s is now falling apart.
Mm. So we've dismantled it, as you say, but what is there that caused us to do that? I mean, is it just that there is a practical limit to power, to empires, Richard? And that there's something internally that takes place that you just can't keep going? There's some force in place that keeps it from happening?
Yes, and I'm not saying it's a good thing. I think it's
no, I know that. You're a libertarian, Richard.
Yeah, right.
I mean, this is evil stuff in your view, and in the founding fathers, and in the view of the founding fathers, I believe, right?
Yeah, that's right. They would be just blown away by the horror of this thing, all the atrocities that have been committed in the name of U.S. leadership over the decades.
Right. Well, in the name of liberty, a lot of times, or the name of freedom, or whatever. Yeah,
that's the big thing. I mean, they have gone around the world creating alliances with, and either directly or indirectly forming alliances with various dictators all over the world. A good example right now is the Saudi dictators. The Saudi royal family is one of Washington's allies. They're a bunch of dictators. Oh. And
horrible.
It's insane. Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. There is your question is there a fundamental force at work that causes empires to fall apart? And yes, there is. It is the fact that you've got to have that economic strength to pour into your military to keep other people intimidated. And what happened, or economists talk about the conflict between guns and butter. You can spend your money on guns, or you can spend your money on welfare schemes. And what happened is Washington thought that it was somehow some exception to this rule, and that they could have both a warfare state and a welfare state. The same mistake that the Roman Empire made. And so they went out to build both a warfare state and a welfare state. And, you know, putting it in very simple terms that everybody's familiar with these days, you can have an empire or you can have Obamacare, but you can't have both.
Yeah.
And Obamacare I'm using as the symbol of the entire welfare state.
Of course.
Yeah, you just can't have both. You cannot afford both. And they have, on top of everything, they've levied so many taxes and regulations and other kinds of economic hardship on the economy that they've greatly reduced the economy's ability to build up the military machine. So this mania for regulating people in their economic lives is a big part of that too. These people are power junkies, and they stick their fingers into everything in the world, and you know now they're losing their fingers.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I mean, I couldn't help but think about you know, the actions of the Federal Reserve and your concept that you talk about frequently in your newsletter, malinvestment. You know, if you, as David Stockman has pointed out on this show, you know, if you take away price discovery in the capital markets, you're going to destroy capitalism, and that's certainly what we're doing as well. So but it's interesting. You know, people want to have it all, right? They want to have it without working for it. And that's socialism, and of course envy and everything else that comes into play. Well, one of the really interesting things that I see happening here, Richard, is what's going on with the BRICS, and also you talked about you know, our waning economic power, and certainly Washington is trying to deny that it's going broke. But yet, you know, the Chinese and the BRICS, but especially the Chinese, are really infuriated by not having some more power in the IMF, more voting rights, and more ability to have a say about the currency, the dollar, which they, you know, I think they're right to be angry about because it's really a license to steal and to take wealth away. Isn't a lot of this built upon this notion of the dollar, the petrodollar that's been put in place to replace the gold dollar after 1971, Richard?
Yeah, you know, an interesting point in all of this, you know, it goes back to the collapse of the empire. You mentioned the IMF. Well, that's another one of those institutions that Washington set up to dominate the world back in the 40s and 50s. And these are all American plans for the whole world, and the rest of the world wants to have something to say about what happens to them.
Yeah, strange.
You know, the old thing about the American Revolution, no taxation without representation. If you're going to do things to us, we want to have a say in what you're doing. And
right.
These people in Washington can't get it through their heads that when the IMF or the UN or somebody is doing something according to American plans, that these other people that are being affected want to have some say in it. And Washington wants to continue being the leader of the world, the guy who runs everything. And again, it's all falling apart now. They've built the thing up. It's called, you know, historians like to refer to imperial overstretch. And that's where Washington is right now in a big, big way.
Okay, so maybe you could help us see some of these signs. I mean, I see them clearly, I think. I think part of it is in this economic sphere and the waning power. I mean, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, I like your comment on it, the Chinese have set up this bank, what is it called? It's sort of the Infrastructure Development Bank or some such institution that's supposed to rival the World Bank. And interestingly enough, all of a sudden, England, the UK joins this bank, and then Australia, New Zealand joins. And all of our closest friends, it seems, Germany and France have run off, and practically everybody except the United States and Japan has now jumped in as members, or at least applied for membership in this AIIB. I guess it's the Asian Infrastructure. I forget exactly what it stands for. It seems very interesting, and clearly Washington was really upset about this. About all of our closest allies joining up with this adversary of, at least as Washington sees it.
Yeah, right. Washington gets so upset over these alternatives to its structure for the world, and it goes back to the ego thing. These people, they're power junkies, and they want to run the world, and anything that undermines their ability to steer events, they consider to be a crisis. And to the point that they will send young American men and women in uniform off to die trying to eliminate this threat to their power. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. But that's what empires do. They get it into their head that they're superior to everybody else, and they know how to run other people's lives. And then, somebody says, no, you don't, and that's a crisis.
Yeah. Richard, 4 minutes left. I can't believe we only have 4 minutes left. Putin seems to be very concerned about the United States. I guess he's probably justified to a certain extent for worrying about the United States' power. Or would your advice to him be, don't worry about it, Mr. Putin, the United States is in decline anyway?
Gosh, I don't think I'd have any advice for Mr. Putin other than pack your bag and disappear and hide someplace. I think he's become a symbol of the threat to U.S. power, and they're going to get rid of him somehow. But I find it hard to be in a position to advise these people on what they ought to do, because my mind is so far different than their mind.
Yeah, I would think so. As a lover of liberty, I think that's probably right.
Yeah, the only advice I could give them, all of them, from Washington to Moscow and Beijing and all of them, is just resign and go home.
Well, that's probably, but yeah, you're quite a bit removed from their mindset, I would say. Listen, I'd like to just tell you, our listeners, some of the chapters in this wonderful special report that you can order, The End of Washington as Superpower, start out with the Monroe Doctrine and explains how that sort of set the table for the mindset of Americas today. Chapter 1, The American Retracement, which really talks about what's going to happen when this thing unfolds, Richard, right?
Yeah.
There's so many interesting chapters. One of the most interesting ones for me, the British threat to the United States. My goodness, I thought the Brits were our closest friends, but you talked about that recently in our letter, in your newsletter. There's just Chapter 4, The Revolution and Reasons for Hope. 2 minutes left. Why should we be hopeful for a revolution against the American power, the superpower?
We should be hopeful because the U.S. empire is a terrible drain on the American people. It is the single biggest threat to us, and when it's gone, life is going to be better for us. Just as the British had an empire, the French government had an empire, the Russian empire existed. Those empires are gone now, and all of those countries are much better places to live now that they no longer have empires. And America will be too when this empire is gone. But the transition period is going to be nasty, and it is nasty. We're in it now. So I'm very hopeful that if more people begin to understand that Washington has an empire and the demise of the empire is a good thing, then it'll happen more quickly, and we'll get out of the transition more quickly, and life will be a lot better.
All right, very good. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Richard, I just tell our people, richardmaybury.com, and Richard has some great investment advice, has done very well for his subscribers over the years. Go to that website, sign up for his letter, buy the special report, The End of Washington is Superpower. Richard, sorry, we're out of time.